Alright, so I have sprayed all of the buildings and I've let the enamels dry for a couple of days. So we are ready to move on. So here is the Administratum Decimus kit, just as an example to illustrate how the spraying was done. So I did an all-over coat of this Rust-Oleum Espresso. Found out about this color from Ash over at Gorilla Miniature Games. It's a really great base tone for buildings. And then I did a zenithal spray with this satin granite, also from Rust-Oleum. And so that's how you get the fading, so that down toward the bottom of the buildings you have some of this brown kind of showing through, but then up at the top you get more of the gray. Now, with rattle cans, there are going to be some areas that did not get hit with paint, so like underneath this balcony and this one right here. And so before we move on, we do still want to seal those areas. Now you could just spray more paint, but then you have to wait for that paint to cure. So instead, what we're going to do is thin out a little bit of Mod Podge, and then just brush that over the surface, and this will dry in like 20-30 minutes. And then we can proceed on to painting the rest of the piece, and we'll add color to those areas that didn't get hit. Most of them are going to be in shadow anyway, once we break out the airbrush. So let's go ahead and mix this up. Alright, so I've added a little bit of the Mod Podge to an old clamshell pack that I had around, and we're just going to add in just a little bit of water to thin it down. This isn't precise, you just want it to be a little bit thinner so that it will go on smooth. If you leave this at sort of full strength, it's actually really good for like stippling it on and adding texture. But we want this to dry pretty smooth. So once you've got it kind of nice and thin, we can just go ahead and paint this onto those areas that did not get great coverage out of our rattle cans. And again, this is just so that we seal in the MDF and we don't have to worry about it soaking up all of our paint, acrylic paint that is, and then warping. So the first thing that we want to do is kind of break up the flatness of the buildings. And so our very first step, I'm going to use this granite gray craft paint. And we're going to stipple this on all over the buildings to kind of show some natural aging and wear and tear. Now, if you're working on a lot of terrain kits, you don't want to waste your really good miniature paints. They're super expensive. These things are super cheap. This bottle was maybe $1.50 for a 2-ounce bottle. So definitely highly recommend using a craft paint for this. You can get these on Amazon or in a store like Hobby Lobby or Michael's. And then for a brush, I'm going to use this super cheap hog's hair brush. Again, you don't want to use a really good like sable hair brush, or even your cheaper miniature painting brushes for this sort of thing. One, these brushes are very large and very soft, so you'll be able to cover more area all at once. But then two, it's going to wreck the brush because we're literally going to be stabbing it onto wood. So we're just going to load up our brush and then get most of that paint off on a paper towel. And for this, I highly recommend you check the load of the brush on the back of your hand. And then we're just going to lightly stab all over the surface of the side walls of the building. And any hard edges, you want to make sure you hit those as well. And so once that's all done, you see we've now got this nice irregularity on the side panels. And I'm not going to do this on the tops of the buildings, but I do want to catch these hard edges, so we can very lightly just dry brush those, like this. Alright, so some of the buildings have some brickwork on them, so to paint that, just add a splash of color on these. I'm going to use red oxide from Liquitex's basic acrylic range. You get a 4-ounce bottle for very, very cheap, and if you're planning on painting any terrain, whether it's fantasy, modern, sci-fi, etc., it's a really great color for brick. So all we're going to do is just apply this onto those brick areas. And if you wanted, on these buildings in particular, you have these like cross beams, you could color those in if you wanted more color on the buildings, but I'm just doing the little brick facades that are scattered here and there, usually around the base of the building. Alright, so now that we got all of the brickwork on our buildings all painted, we're now going to wash the buildings to help add some dark color into all of that laser etched recesses on our terrain. So in order to do this, I actually mixed up my own terrain wash. Because these buildings are so large and I'm doing so many of them, you definitely don't want to use your really good miniature washes. One, those are expensive and you don't want to waste them, but then two, they're formulated to be a little bit thicker, and we want something that's actually very, very thin for our terrain. So I'm not going to go into super in-depth detail on how I did this. Up in the cards, I'm going to put a link to a video from, God, like 8-9 years ago from Mel, the terrain tutor. Over in the UK, he has a really great video on how to make your own terrain washes, and that's what I followed in order to do this. So you're going to want some matte medium. Then you're also going to want some flow aid. And then you're going to want your acrylic paint. So I mixed burnt umber and black. And it's roughly 3 parts burnt umber, 1 part black. So I get a really dark, dirty brown. And then you're also going to need some water. I just use purified water because that's really all I have in the house. Ideally, you would want pure distilled water, but tap water can work as well, so long as you're not in an area where your tap water is super, super hard. Now I have the silicone mixing cups that you can get on Amazon that are really great for this sort of thing. They're really easy to clean. And then it also has a pour spout, so when I'm done, I don't have to waste anything. I can pour that into a bottle and seal it and have it available for later. Now, rough ratios, it was about 100 milliliters of water with a little bit of flow aid, and then I added in probably like 25 milliliters of matte medium, as well as a couple squirts of this craft paint. Again, check out Mel the Terrain Tutor's video for the exact ratios, but let's just go ahead and wash this building. And so all you're going to do is load your giant hog's hair brush and just kind of flood the surface and work this into all of those cracks. Now this is thin enough to where it'll tint the surface where it dries, but it's not going to stain it too much, which is exactly what we want. We don't want to lose all of the chipping and everything that we did previously. And this will just settle nicely in all of those recessed lines. And then when it dries on the flat surfaces, it will be a little patchy and irregular, but that's actually how buildings look out in the real world. So just go ahead, hit all of the vertical surfaces on your buildings. Now, most of the buildings, I'm not doing the top. Some of the buildings do have some like grid work etched into the roof. So you can go ahead and do those if you want. Alright, so now we're going to airbrush in some shadows using Ammo's Starship Filth. This is... It seems to me it's an acrylic ink that's really thin and probably has a little bit of flow improver mixed in. This color is a really dark brown. If you put it on really fine, you kind of get that brown tone. If you put it on kind of thick, it almost looks black to the eye. It's very dark. And so we're going to airbrush this into our shadow areas at the corners of the buildings, as well as in a ring on the top of the buildings, down where sort of the floor of the roof meets those raised walls. And you want your pressure on your airbrush to be fairly low so that you don't get any splattering, and go very easy on your trigger action, guys. It takes a little getting used to using this product because it's so thin. I highly recommend, before you do this on your model, just go ahead and practice on like a piece of paper. If you've never used paint this thin before. And my other tip here is, if you do mess up, if you very quickly grab a paper towel, you can actually just wipe this away, and no harm, no foul. Alright, so we've gone ahead and added in that shadow color, and now we're going to go ahead and add some streaking effects to the buildings, just to add a little bit more color and make them look a little old and worn in. Alright, so the very first step of this is to take some neat mineral spirits and just lightly brush the surface where we're going to be applying the enamel paint. And this will just help us get some really effective streaks without too much effort. And now once that's done, I've got a selection of the streaking brushers by Ammo, and we're just going to give these a good shake and then start our streaks on the side of the building. Now, using these couldn't be any simpler. They come with a applicator brush already in the bottle for you, and you just want to add little streaks of all your various colors all over the face of the miniature, and if possible you want to use multiple colors so that you get some nice natural looking variation. Alright, so we've got all of our streaks applied, and now we're going to load up that brush with some mineral spirits and then get the excess off, and then we're just going to run the brush over those areas, and occasionally you want to dab that excess paint off, and just streak from top to bottom And the more you do this, the fainter the lines will become. And you can do as much or as little as you want. And this will just add those nice faded, rain marks and your grime streaks down the sides of your buildings. Now, there's another technique that you can use called the dot filter method, and I'll show you that here now. So I switched over to an oil brusher, Starship Filth. It's a really great color for sort of dirt and grime. So all we're going to do with this is on this side of the building, we're just going to add dots of this around in random places. And you do want to make this sort of as random as possible. And then once you've got those dots applied, we're just going to load up our brush with some of that mineral spirits. And then you're just going to kind of blend this around. So each of the dots, kind of scrub it around and feather it out. And this will add very subtle staining and discoloration across the surface, and it'll be very, very transparent. So it blends very nicely with whatever you've got underneath. So now I'm going to carry on and finish the rest of the buildings, and then we'll go ahead and we'll seal them with a nice enamel matte sealer, and then we'll move on to our final steps. Alright, so here we are. The buildings have all been matte coated, and as you can see, I added a little bit of the Geek Gaming Scene It's base ready urban mix onto some of the areas to simulate some rubble. And so if you wanted to go ahead and just start playing with these buildings now, you totally could. But I want to add just a little bit more color to them. And so I have these enamel liquid pigments from AK Interactive, and I wanted to go ahead and give these a try. So this is actually my first time using the product. So I grabbed 3 tones. We have the standard rust, we have brick dust, and then we have rubble rust. So we're gonna add some oranges and browns. Let's start with the rubble dust on those rubble piles. Alright, so here we go. Now, I watched the promo videos for this product, and you're supposed to be able to just apply this neat without the need for any pigment fixer. Once it's dry, the pigment should be fixed. And you can thin it if you wanted, and you can use thinner to sort of feather the effect before it's fully cured. But it's meant to really just be a one-stop, one-and-done. It seems like the product is very, very thin, and I really do like the way it gets down into all of this texture. So next we're going to move on to brick dust, and I'm just going to add a few random spots of this on the floor of the damaged buildings, just to add little pips of color. Again, this is really thin, so you can just kind of put down a little bit and then feather it out. Right, and now lastly, we're going to come in with the rust tone, and on the outside of the building, just add a few little dots of this in places. Then we'll clean off our brush. Then I'm going to come in and just kind of feather that out. Alright, so let me set up all of the terrain on a table. I'll show you what this looks like once that wet pigment dries, and I'll give you my final thoughts on the kits. Alright, and so just like in the last video where I built everything, I went ahead and set up this sort of diorama shot on a 2x4 table. We got a Frontline Gaming urban mat down here that I think works really well for the scale. And then we've got not all, most of the buildings. I actually couldn't fit some of the ruins on the board without having it look like super cluttered. But I also went ahead and threw down some Legions Imperialis models. We got some knights, some tanks, some infantry, got some titans on the board, just so that you guys can kind of get a look and feel for how this would look in your games. Now, one thing I did want to call out was, so the very last step that we did was add this liquid weathering pigment. And it turns out really, really well. One thing you do need to be careful with, though, is that because it goes down liquid, you do get sort of like a ringing effect as it dries. And you just need to wet your brush in a little bit of odorless enamel thinner and then kind of feather out that edge. And you can get some really nice blended effects just like these. And this other one was a little bit heavier weathered, so you can see some of the different variations that you can get by just adding a little bit more or a little bit less of the pigment. But that's all I got for today, guys. If you enjoyed the video, go ahead, hit like, subscribe if you're not subscribed already. Big shout out to my channel members, and I will catch you all in the next video.